And I would say, if you are a guest to Junction Community Church for their very first time, or JCC is a little bit new for you, I just want to welcome you. I want to thank you for being here. My name is Paul. I'm the lead pastor here, and we've been praying for you. We've been believing that God has something so incredible in store for your life, and so I want you to feel at home and welcome. I just got to say that I love the season that we're headed into. This season of the fall, school getting back in progress. Really why I love it is because it gets us back to routines, to schedules. It gets us back to consistency. And that's true whether you have kids and you got kids going back to school or not. Whatever the case is, this is a season where we kind of get back to a new norm. And I always look at the summer. I love the summer, but I always look at the summer as a very chaotic time. You know, we're doing vacations, church life, everybody's busy and they're vacationing, and then things start to settle out in the fall. Even in your work environments, you see that happen in your work environments where there's a lot of different activities and things kind of slow down in the summer, but then you get back to a consistency in the fall. And I love getting back to that consistency. In fact, for us as a church, we started a brand new message series last Sunday, and that's really about us getting back to routine, and we're calling this one Like Never Before. Like never before. And I love this idea that we're moving into a season like never before. In fact, in the first message last week, we discovered the reality that God can and will do the unimaginable in our lives. And I want you to think about that for a moment, for yourself and for your family. I want you to think about that for our church and our community. What does that look like? But what I do know is at the end of the day, God will do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or even imagine. That's what the Bible tells us. And so our takeaway from last week was this: like never before, God will do the unimaginable in our lives. He is working in your life. And I just want to encourage you for a moment that no matter where you're at, no matter what you're going through, no matter if you're at the top of the mountain and you're like our soul squad that recently was up on top of a 14er together, if that was you and you were on top of the mountain and you were so excited about that, that's great. If that's what the picture of your life looks like, great. But maybe you're not going through that kind of moment. Maybe you're kind of in the valley and you're actually in a sticky, muddy situation and you're not feeling so good. But what I want you to know is that in every moment of your life, God is at work. And He has something so incredible He wants to do in and through your life. And He's doing it right here at Junction Community Church. We're seeing God do the unimaginable in our midst. Now, He's doing a new thing. And we talked about this last week. I shared just a little bit about what it looks like for me, my faith journey. And one of the first scriptures that came to me was out of Isaiah chapter 43 when I was first saved, and really talking about God doing a new work in my heart, doing a new work in my life. And we reflected on that last week, and really one of the challenges of that text was, look, God is doing a new thing. Now it springs forth, the Bible says, and then it asks, do you not perceive it? And we need to be perceptive of what God is doing in our hearts, perceptive of what He's doing in our lives, because let me guarantee you this, He is always at work, always. He's always at work. And there are moments in our lives, there are moments in your life where you've questioned that. There are moments where you've sat back and you said, God, are you really? And what I would say to you, if you've ever questioned God's work in your life, that in that moment, I would venture to say He was working the most. He was working the most to work in you, to work around you, to work through you, and you just got to know that He is at work. And so the Bible again says, do you not perceive it? In other words, you got to take a look and you got to really unpack what's happening around you and begin to take notes that God is at work. And so for me, for us as a church, I believe that God is at work in our midst. I believe God is at work in your life. In fact, my prayer for you, we're in 21 days of prayer right now, and my prayer for you is that God would work in you. My prayer for you is that God would work in your family. And so whatever the case, you just got to know that God is at work. I believe it. Does anybody else believe with me this morning that God is at work in us and in our midst? When we think about all that God is doing, and when we think about the season that's in front of us, I know that this is going to be a season of our lives, that when we look to the asterisk next to this season, and we look at the footnote of it, it's going to be marked by this phrase, like never before. That it was a season like never before. that in your faith and in your finances and in your family and in your walk with God, it was a season like never before. It was marked like never before in your life. And so I really believe that to be the case. And when I think about that, for me, I think about it in the context of our families. I think about it in the context of our church family, that God wants to work like never before. And it reminds me of this idea that we are living and leaving a legacy that right now. We are living, leading, and leaving a legacy for our families. And I want you to think about that for a moment, because when we think about a season like never before, and we think about how God is at work and what He wants to do, we've got to know that part of that is that He works in our families. And for our families, God wants us to live, lead, and leave a legacy. And when I think about leaving a family legacy, it begins in the small, everyday interactions. It's not just the big moments of life. It's not just the big moments of when this happened or when that happens or when an experience happens. You know, I love vacation. Vacation is a great time, right? You time out, you check out, you get involved in doing something other than the norm. And those are great moments for families. And that doesn't matter whether you're traveling around the world or you're going across the street and you're just hanging out at the park. The point is, though, is that I love those moments where we vacation, where we check out, and we connect. But again, it's not just in the big moments of life, the vacation moments of life, or the big moments of, for example, a graduation or some other thing that might happen in our lives. It's in the everyday. Like leaving a legacy is in the everyday. So parents and grandparents, you know this to be true, that it's every day that we leave a legacy. In fact, one of the things that's said often about parenting and life in general is this idea that the days are long, but the years are short. Have you ever heard that phrase? The days are long. In fact, you know, sometimes we finish a day out and we say, man, that was a long day. And the reality is no, it was 24 hours just like the day before, right? But we all get what we mean when we say that. We're not saying that it was more than 24 hours. It was just a long day. That was a lot to take in one day, and it was a long day. But again, the days are long, but the years are short. And for those of us that have children, we know this to be true. The saying goes that time flies. And that is certainly true when it comes to our family. But I want us to remember that we're living and leading a legacy. And one day we will leave a legacy. What will that be? When I think about time, I think about my daughters. I posted a picture last night on Facebook. It was this one. This is a candid shot. It wasn't taken by a professional photographer. It wasn't doctored up. There's no filter applied to that. It's just what it is. And this is probably Christmas morning. Selah is days old here. She was born on December 19th. And that was almost 10 years ago. And then you have my precious babies here. And they're not precious babies anymore, though. They're just precious growing babies, right? But in my eyes, they'll always be my babies. In fact, Jada here, look how cute she is, right? And I'll never forget, because Miss Jada, when she was little, I would always tell Jada, you're so cute. And she would say, no, I'm not. I'm big. And I would just... And so I love to hear her say it, because she said it with such authority and aggression. And she's like, no, I'm not. I'm big, you know. And I'm like, so I would just say it over and go, Jada, you're so cute. Baby, you're so cute. No, I'm not. I'm big. And so this was the stage. So nowadays, I still do it to her. Nowadays, I still tell her, Jada, you're so cute. And now she goes, because she knows this is our little thing, right? And even as she grows up, and Miss Becca, it's hard to believe that Miss Becca is already 16 years old. Like, that makes me feel old. And to know that my oldest daughter is 16, and some of you are like, how old are you, young man? Oh, that's right, 39. My youngest kid's your age. You know, there's all different ages in this place. And the reality is that time flies. And before you know it, you go from this, a newborn, to a little bit, a couple days. Now you can kind of see, oh, that's who that baby is. That's Selah. And so if you've never seen Selah before, that baby picture really didn't do it. They're really focused on something. And like parents, what do? We want to be all in their business when they're doing something. Let me get a picture. They're like, okay, Mom, enough. I know, I'm going to school again. Big deal. I know it's the end of school year. And back in the day, we didn't do all that. Like, what's up with social media, right? We didn't do none of that. But now if you don't do it, you're a bad parent. I guess I'm a bad parent because I don't post a whole lot on Facebook, you know? First day of school, my wife does. Thank you, baby. She's amazing. Let's give her one big round of applause. You're amazing. And the truth is that they grow, and then they go from this stage to a little bit older. And this is a really funny day because previous, and I don't have the picture to prove it today, but previous to this, Mary was out on a conference. She was in Denver, and I've even got a video where Selah, in that time frame, I asked her, hey, where's Mom? And she said, she's dumber. And I go, what? And so I had to record it because, you know, kids, I mean, look how little she is there. And she's all, Mom's dumber. And what she was trying to say is Mom's in Denver. But she said, Mom's dumber. And so I recorded it, and that morning, Mary was coming home, and of course, the girls, you know, I didn't do their hair. They got baths, but they didn't get their hair combed out and barrettes. I don't do barrettes. I don't do braids. I just do like, here. And now at least it's untangled, and be happy about that. But Mom came home, and she did their hair, and so I had to get a picture with Mom and the girls because their hair was did. And so that's them, but then you fast forward a couple more years, and now, oh my gosh, where are the moments? My little babies are going away. They're not that little anymore. And so again, the days are long, but the years are short, and the question is, what legacy are we leaving behind? And so here they are. This was another fun experience. We were in Denver, and we were at the museum, and so we're taking pictures, and the art museum, and so this was like, hey, let me get a picture of the girls. And now, fast forward, this is this spring. And it's like, where does the time go? How does it happen that quick? And they're all shaka and cool now, you know, like shaka, you know, and I'm thinking like, okay, where does the time go? And now Becca, who's really tall, is actually almost as tall as her parents now. And, you know, because we're blessed with the tall genes in my family, you know what I'm saying? But the point is the question comes back to what legacy are we leaving behind? And from one generation to the next, time keeps passing by and it waits for no one. As we consider the brevity of our time and life, the questions we must keep at the forefront of our lives are these two questions I want to challenge you with today. How are we spending our time? How are you spending your time? And secondly, what legacy are we living and leaving for our children and for those who come after us? Those are the questions for us to ponder today, is how are you spending your time? Like, how are you not only spending your time, but what legacy are you leaving to your children? When we think about legacy, oftentimes we think about leaving a financial inheritance. But I would challenge us this morning. It's not just about a financial inheritance. Really, it's about investing in relationship. It's about instilling values and teaching the priority of God to our children and to the generations who follow. In fact, Proverbs 13:22, it says this, a good person leaves an inheritance for their children's what? Children. Leaves an inheritance. But a sinner's wealth is stored up for the righteous. Now, we think about this. Most of the times when we think about an inheritance or a legacy, we do have this notation of like it only tied to some financial wealth goal. And I would just say to every one of us, let us pop that bubble because it's bigger than that. It's way bigger than that. In fact, a good person, the Bible says, or in another version it says a righteous person, leaves an inheritance for their children's children. Now, certainly, I think we should be thinking about our children and our children's children and what we leave them. But let me challenge us this morning. I'm not just talking about a financial inheritance. In fact, I'm not talking about that at all. Really, what I would challenge you with today is what values, what priorities, and what relational input are you leaving to your children? Like, what are you investing in them? Not just what stuff, not just what time. You see, again, there's an implication of financial wealth in this text, but when we read God's word from beginning to end, we know that God said this. We just came out of a series, Sermon on the Mount, and we learned in the Sermon on the Mount that we are not storing up for ourselves riches on earth, but riches where? In heaven, yeah. Like for us, the value is not just about earth, me, myself, and I. It is about this reality that we are investing in a bigger cause, a bigger purpose, a kingdom-wide purpose that extends beyond the lifetime of this earth. And so we're investing on something way bigger. And so leaving a legacy reaches beyond financial wealth. It reaches into the relationships. And for most of us, what we remember about our parents or grandparents or loved ones that have passed on, we remember the values that they live by. We remembered, we don't remember their stuff, yeah. And if we remember their stuff, it's their trinket stuff that really didn't have any value anyway. It was like grandma's favorite little thing, and it was probably passed down to her from one generation to the next. The point is, though, is that when we remember our loved ones, we don't remember those valuable things, those materialistic things. We remember the moments and meaningful memories that we had with them, right? I think about the moments that I've had with my grandmother or my grandfather. I think about, most recently, my grandfather passed away just last month, and I think through that, and I'm like, I remember moments I had with him, and I can go on and on about what those moments are. I'll never forget what it was like to hang out with my grandfather and go for a ride with him in his truck, what he called his truck. And it wasn't a pickup truck, and he made that clear. A pickup truck is a little truck, and but what he was talking about is truck, and he hauled wood and iron in that truck, and that was a truck. And I wish I had a picture of that truck, but for this morning. But the point is, I remember those moments with him, being in his big truck, crawling all the way up there and driving, and he always had juicy fruit gum. And I don't know why, but I always wanted juicy fruit gum when I was a kid because Grandpa had it. You see what I mean about the memories? And you have memories of your own family. You have memories of those things. But again, the legacy that we leave is the values, it's the investment we make in the next generation. And we make this investment in several ways. And so I want to talk about leaving a lasting family legacy. I want to share just a few thoughts on what that means today. And so for starters, let's go to Psalm 78, and we're going to look at 4 verses here, starting in verse 5. And really it's talking about God. It says, He decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law in Israel, which He commanded our ancestors to teach their children. So God decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law in Israel, which He commanded our ancestors to teach their children. And so what is the primary task here? They're to do what? What's the action involved? They're to teach. And so more than giving something to the next generation in terms of a materialistic thing, we want to give in terms of information, wisdom, and insight passed down to the next generation. I'll never forget, speaking of my grandfather, I wanted to learn how to speak Spanish. And you just got to know, I didn't grow up around a whole lot of Spanish, but, it was intermixed. It was what we call Spanglish. But I'll never forget, for whatever reason, one of the first words, because I asked my grandpa, I said, would you teach me Spanish? And he said, yeah. So I said, how? And I'll never forget it. It's his porch. I have the memory of it's in his porch. It's in the back. And we're sitting there on a bench, and I asked him, Grandpa, would you teach me Spanish? And he says, yes. And I say, okay, first word I want to learn is grandpa. And he says, abuelo or abuelito. And I said, okay, boom, I learned Spanish just like that. I have a word. And every time I would see him, he wouldn't say, I wouldn't say abuelo. He would say, órale vato. That's what he would always tell me. And so I would come in and I'd be like, vato. That's what I would tell him. It was just my thing with my grandfather. But we learn from one generation to the next. And so we teach. Verse 6, it says, so the next generation would know them, even the children yet to be born, and they in turn would tell their children. Again, from one generation to the next, and so on, and so on, and so on. We would teach them these values. It creates a ripple effect, and those we teach will eventually teach those who come after them. It goes on, it says, verse 7, then they would put their trust in God and would not forget His deeds, but would keep His commands. They would not be like the ancestors, stubborn and rebellious generation, whose hearts were not loyal to God, whose spirits were not faithful to Him. No. He's saying, look, as we teach the next generation, as we teach the next generation, they will teach the generation after them, and so on and so forth. And in doing so, as we invest in teaching the next generation, it will have a ripple effect. And in the end, our children and our grandchildren will put their trust in God. You see, there's a lot of things that we can put our trust in. We can put our trust in people. We can put our trust in processes. We can put our trust in governments. We can put our trust in activities. We can put our trust in all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, I want you to know that unless you have your trust in Almighty God, you have your trust misplaced. Our trust is in God first, and everything else comes secondary to that. And that's a good place for an amen. Our trust is in God. Our trust is in God. And we have to know that as we teach the generations who come after us, I don't want to just teach them about stuff. Like, trust me, they need that. They need to know about stuff. Because I'll tell you what, our culture doesn't teach about stuff very well. You know how I know that? Because even our government teaches about just getting more debt and more debt and more debt and more debt and more debt, and that's how you live your life. Like, we need to teach our kids to do something different because that debt cycle's not working out. Anybody, amen? And we know what the pressure of debt looks like. We want to teach our kids a different way. So we want to teach them to trust in God. We want to teach them. And again, whether your children are young or grown or you have grandchildren, whatever it is, we've got to teach them to trust in God. Not forgetting His deeds and keeping His commands will be the result. That they'll know what He's done. Like, I want my kids to know what God has done in my heart and my life. I don't want them to know. Here, can I be honest with you for a moment? I don't want them to know that, oh, my dad was a pastor for many, many years, and he led youth groups and missions teams, and he did this and he did that. Whatever. I don't want them to know that. I want them to know the stories of life change. I want them to know that there was a day where I was far from God. And there were days as I served God and followed God that I wrestled with my faith. But at the end of the day, I remained faithful to God, and His faithfulness was shown in my life. I want them to know those things. I want them to look at my life and say, my dad was that. He lived what he led, and that was the real deal. And so again, I don't want them, as we pass on to the next generation, as we teach the next generation, they will find trust in God, and they'll remember God's deeds, and they'll keep His commands. Because it's about leaving a godly legacy is far more important than leaving financial wealth to the next generation. Let me say that again. Leaving a godly legacy is far more important than leaving a financial blessing to the next generation. I'm not saying it has to be either or, but what I am saying is it's more important. And I believe that as you lead with that value at the forefront, then God can certainly bless you. He can certainly use you to leave something of value to the next generation. But at the end of the day, we can transfer such greater things than money. And so I want us to keep that at the forefront. I want to look to a final verse today. It comes to us in Acts chapter 13, verse 36. But before I read it, and before you get too distracted reading it, you have to know that there's a greater context to this text. And what God's really talking about here is the coming of Jesus as the Messiah. And there's a lot that comes to this. I would encourage you to read Acts chapter 13. But then there's this highlight moment where the writer talks about David, King David, and about his life. And there are some things that we can learn from this. And so starting in, or as we read this verse, it says, "Now when David had served God's purpose in his own generation, he fell asleep, he was buried with his ancestors, and his body decayed." Well, pretty straightforward, right? Pretty straightforward for us this morning. That David, he lived his life, but not only did David live his life, he faced what one day we will all face, and that is one thing we know that every one of us will have in common is that one day our lives will end on this earth. It'll be like, and the question really that we need to start contemplating is, what legacy am I leaving? You know, what am I living every day in the day-to-day interactions? What legacy am I living, and what legacy am I leaving? But here it says, now when David had served God's purpose in his own generation. When we think about one generation to the next, and we think about David, David had a purpose in his generation. There was a specific purpose that David was to live out in his life and in his generation. And let me just say to every one of us this morning, whether you're in this building or you're participating online this morning, that there is a purpose that God has for you in this generation, at this moment, for such a time as this. And you've got to know, God has not forgotten you, but He has a purpose for you. He's got a purpose for you. And so David, we know, had a purpose. In fact, David not only had a purpose, but David left a legacy. His legacy is massive. When we read through the Bible, there are so many things that we learn about David. One thing that most of us, either watching and participating online or in this building today, we all know about David and, see? I mean, I didn't even have to prep that one. David and Goliath. I mean, whether you're churched or unchurched, we all know about David and Goliath. But at the end of the day, what we know is that David left a legacy. David left a legacy. And so, not only did he serve God's purpose in his generation, but he also left a legacy. And though David died, like we all will, he left an incredible legacy of character, of conduct that we can all learn from. In our lives, God has a purpose, and that purpose will live beyond us to impact the next generation and generations to come. I love that thought. That not only did David have a purpose, but we have a purpose. God has a purpose for us. And my question to you as we prepare to close today is I want you to really think about what is God's purpose for you and what is the legacy that you are living, leading, and that one day you will leave behind. That's a challenging thought. So I want to briefly recap and point us towards some very practical ways that we can apply what we've learned this morning. As we walk into a season that would be defined as like never before, it's imperative that we think about the legacy we are living and leaving for the next generation. Think about that. What legacy are you leaving? Not just leaving. What legacy are you living? What are you living out in your life? What are you living out? And again, I'm not just talking about the big moments of life, not the major accomplishments. I'm talking about the day in, day out interactions. What legacy are you living? And think about not just, how it relates to the community or how it impacts those around you. I want you to just scale it back to the context of the roof over your head, your home, your family. What legacy are you leaving? And so, if it's going to be a like never before legacy, though there might be a financial implication to the inheritance that you will leave the next generation, our impact on future generations is much greater than simply a matter of money. It's bigger than that. In fact, I never really received an inheritance of money from my grandparents. But what I did receive from them is far greater than any money or materialistic thing. They taught me values. They taught me so much in life. And we are responsible, each one of us, to teach our children about trusting in God. Think about this for a moment. And some of you are kids in this place, I get it. But if you can learn this stuff early, better for you. But to every father in this room, to every mother in this room, to every grandparent in this room, I want you to know that the greatest inheritance you can leave for your children is teaching them to trust in God. Is teaching them to trust in what God has in store for their lives. Because in doing so, they're going to not only know God's deeds, but they're going to follow His ways. And I'll tell you what, there's no greater path for them. There is no greater path than for them to know God's deeds and to follow His ways. Because at the end of the day, it's our purpose and it's the legacy we will leave our children and their children and so on and so forth that matters most. I want my kids to trust God. I'll tell you what, a soft, cushy life doesn't teach your kids to trust God. But when you go through a storm and when you go through a trial and when you go through challenges in your life and you still land on your feet and you keep driving up the mountain and you keep believing God for His very best, in those moments, your kids don't look and say, hey, he's like a fair weather Christian. No. This dude believes it when the storm's in front of him, when the storm's around him, and when my life is falling apart, I can look back to my mom, to my dad, and I can know that they walked the walk, they lived what they believed, and they left a legacy of faith Come on. They left a legacy of faith. And so parents and grandparents, I've said this often over the years. It's your responsibility to expose your children to faith early and often. It's your responsibility. As our children begin a new school year, they will grow intellectually. They will come back and they will be able to read far better than they did when they started the year. They will be able to solve more intricate math problems than they did when they started the year. But here's my challenge. I don't want to know that at the end of 9 months from now, they've grown, and that be the end of the story. I want to know that spiritually they've developed, they've grown, their faith is on another level, and they're not just smarter up here, they're more passionate on the inside about God and who He is and what He has in store for their life. That's what I want to see. And it's never too early to start, and let me say this, it's never too late to start. And so I challenge you parents, I challenge you grandparents, make the relational investment. Your kids are the priority. They're not just part of the equation, they are the equation. And I'll tell you, marriages, let me just say this, your marriage is just not part of the equation, your marriage is the equation. You can't have a healthy family and healthy children without a healthy marriage. You know what, at the end of the day, I married this woman first before I had kids. And so she is number one in my home, not my kids. We live in a generation that's all about kids first. And I would say put your marriage first and let everything else align after that. That's a good word right there that we all need to heed. And so finally, as a church, we have the opportunity to invest in the next generation as we lead them towards a growing relationship with Jesus Christ. And you got to know that we have the most incredible children's and youth pastors here at JCC. And right now, they are investing in your children. Right now, our kids are being invested in such a way that they're being nurtured and formed to know God, to know Jesus in a personal way, and to make Him known. That's happening. We're making that investment. And this is something, again, that we do week in and week out as we teach the timeless truths of God. But as we move forward into a season like never before, I'm speaking to the church, that's every one of us. We're moving into a moment where we also have the opportunity to invest in a facility that will prioritize our children and youth. And we've been talking about this for several years, and we've been amping up the conversation since Easter, and we have this picture of this building that's just a vision right now. It's just a vision. It's a what. It's a what we're planning on doing. But I'll tell you what, there's a greater why behind the what. And the why we do this is because we are investing in our future generations to come. And I believe, just as the Bible said in the text today in Psalm 78, it said, teach this so that there's a generation who are yet to be born that will be benefit from this, that they'll be blessed by this. And here's what I would say, church, can we get a vision that we, as we work towards building this building and establishing this place for our children, I have a vision. And I look one day where not too far in the future from now, there's going to be kids and they're going to be running through the halls, they're going to be running through the building, in the gym they're going to be playing football, basketball, it's going to be big enough, like they're going to be able to do all that. They're going to be learning, growing as in their athletics. I envision little kids wrestling. Oh man, I love that. I envision little kids with gis on, putting each other in arm bars, safely of course, through Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I envision this happening. I envision it taking place. I see it in my mind's eye already. But I'll tell you what, there's going to be a day where we're all asked, what legacy did you leave? And we will be able to say loud and clear, as a generation for such a time as this, we rose up and we said like never before, we're going to invest in our children. We're going to invest in future generations because they one day will fill that building. And there's also a thought. There's a thought that one day there are kids who are yet to be born, and I need to wrap up, but there are kids yet to be born that will walk through this building, through these doors, and they will call JCC home. And beyond calling JCC home, there is one day that when they walk through this building, they will come to know a personal, life-giving relationship with Jesus Christ, and it will be because we decided we're going to invest. We're going to invest in the next generation. And so right now, we're praying through 21 days of prayer. And in the next month, in September and in October, we're going to talk about what it looks like to make an investment. And we're going to challenge everybody in this place to make an investment in prayer and in service and financially. And we're going to say, you know what? Let's invest in the next generation. So I want you to start praying about that already. But as we continue to work towards building a new multi-purpose building, I'm trusting God for His direction and His provision. We all have an opportunity to invest. Again, in your families, in the future here at JCC, through prayer, service, and ultimately our financial generosity. We're not taking up an offering today, but in the next couple months we're going to talk a lot about that. And I want to challenge you to begin to pray about that. How would God lead you to invest in the next generation? Because if we're going to walk in the season that's defined like never before, it's going to require something of us. It's going to require an investment, a sacrifice, that we would teach and model to our children what it means to go all in. And so, as we close, I leave you with this final statement. Living and leaving a family legacy is a daily responsibility entrusted to me, make it personal, by the Lord Himself. And so you got to make this personal. Living and leaving a family legacy is a daily responsibility entrusted to me by the Lord. I don't know if you have young children, older children, no children. I don't know your story. But what I do know is that we all have an opportunity to make an investment in future generations. Would you stand with me this morning? As we close, we're going to worship. And as we worship for just a moment here, I want you to declare, God, what is it that you want to do in me to live and leave a legacy? In my own family, it starts there. And for future generations that will come to JCC. Come on, let's worship.